Okay, I think we're set. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to today's Insight. We're here to talk about importing data into Stratum. So I want to welcome everyone to the Insight today. My name is Adam Kurtz, and I have been with Sylvan for I think it's around 23 years. And I have been involved with the sales side and certainly on the implementation side as well. And so welcome. I'm here to step you through today's topic. And today, like I said, we'll be talking about the data import utility that and how potentially how users and power users and power analysts can import data into Viewer, and essentially storing data back into Stratum. So we'll look at an overview and we'll discuss the concept. We'll look at the different types of files that are accepted for this type of input. And then we'll go through the menus of how one would initiate a data import job. Once the job processes, then we'll go in and see how we can view the data and adjust it as needed. All right, so that's kind of what we want to cover today. And first off, we want to start off with the overview, and that is discuss where the data would end up. And the answer to that question is in the Stratum Data Hub. So the Stratum Data Hub holds basically all the data for the data within Stratum. So any data that you're accessing via Stratum, rest assured that that data is secured and stored within the Stratum database. And that database might be on SQL Server or on the iSeries. But essentially that's the hub, and that's where all the data resides. And that's a good thing. You have a single version of the truth. You have a basically a semantic layer where you can query the data using business descriptions and business metadata so that users can really kind of get their own data on their own. And now we're talking about getting data back into Stratum. So now we're talking about using a menu within Viewer to then get data, and we're talking about this area up here, the user generated data, where we now have this concept of data import. So that kind of lies in the area of plan generation and plan maintenance, where planning would come into play here. Once the data gets imported, then you can go in and adjust the data and use your Excel imports as needed as well to either augment or replace what's already there. So you've got control over how that data would get imported into Stratum. And of course, no coding is required. This is fully expected, to have users drive this process as opposed to IT. So that's where the data ends up. So you might be importing the data within the web client, using Viewer and your whatever browser of choice that you're using. And then that data magically gets stored back into the Stratum Data Hub, the Stratum database, and rightfully gets put into its table where that data resides, and it's stored and secured as needed. So that's basically what we're talking about. Is we're going to really kind of concentrate in on that data import capability and being able to import data into Stratum using this data import capability in an Excel file. So the concept is such that we would have an Excel file with data in it, and that data would be in a certain type of format. And so you'll have either a time series format, or transaction-based format, and we'll take a closer look at that in a second. You'll also be required to configure the file. So you'll need to tell Stratum how to deal with either adding or replacing the data that you're trying to get into it. What are the headers within the file, and how should Stratum deal with those headers? Normally you're going to have a time date stamp so that Stratum knows how to bucket the data. So that would be typically part of your headers. And then, what type of file will you be using? Stratum needs to know whether it's a time series file or a transaction-based file. Once you get that stuff out of the way, then the file gets imported into the utility, and then you're able to start your mapping. There is the concept of auto map. So the better you do in terms of defining the pieces of data that you have within your Excel file, if it matches the metadata within Stratum, then Stratum will do its best to auto map the file in so that you would need to do minimal mapping. Nevertheless, you have the ability to override auto mapping and to manually map as needed. And then job submission. So now you have the concept of validating and submitting the job and having the job run. And the jobs run immediately. So this is not something that you need to wait overnight for. So this is a concept where the data is sent immediately back to the Stratum database, and then you are emailed once that job is finished. And then at that point, you can then go in and analyze the data. The file types would look like this. In this case, the time series file will be your classic standard flat file. So now you have your dimensions there on the left-hand side where you have brand codes and product codes, etc. And customer, in this case, we also have that. Also notice that we have descriptions in there, and those description columns, you can leave those in, but those won't get loaded. And the reason for that is that the descriptions are already loaded through another process via the nightly process. So this is not something we want to overwrite with descriptions from an Excel file, because we would overwrite, the descriptions coming from your ERP system, and we don't want to do that. However, we will accept the brand codes and the product and customer codes. So Stratum will identify, by those column headers what those dimensions should be, and then it will accept those codes as valid codes. Another thing to be cognizant of here is what your key length is for that dimension. For instance, customer typically is a 25 or a maximum length dimension, and product normally is 2. Brand, however, it could be variable. So, it could be up to maybe 10 keys. And if you try to import a brand that has over 11, maybe 12, basically over 10 keys, that will be truncated within Stratum. So that's something to keep in mind as well. This is a time series. So time series files will have time going across the horizon. As you can see, my file has 3 header columns. One that says sales. The second column says January, February, the months, the name of the months, and then the third column, or third row, I should say, has dates in them. So I've got 3 row column, basically 3 rows that are serving as my headers. And again, it will use that third row to map in and bucket the data, because that's driving the time that I need to bucket the data. So Stratum needs that time, for those time periods, those dates, so that it gets bucketed accordingly. So this is more or less a time series file. You could also use a transaction formatted file. In this case, time is just single record. It's a single field of the record, and it's just one field, one column. And so this is more classic ERP. So the time series file, normally I see this with forecast analysts, where they want to see the forecast here in such a manner. Transaction based is typically operational. If the data is coming from another type system, normally this is how it's going to get delivered. And so we thought it would be good to support both formats. So here you have the same concept. You've got this concept of the dimensions. You still have, if you want, your master file data can still be in there, and again, that would get ignored. And then over here to the right, you'll have your data columns. Here I can see list price or sales, dollars, units, etc. If that's what you're loading. And then time would be driven off of this opportunity date column here. So again, time series, transaction-based formats, those are the formats that we'll accept at this point. and there's only two. And so, you should be able to construct the file in such a manner that Stratum will go ahead and import that data. So how do we get to the import utility? Well, the import utility is part of the admin utilities menu. So this is something that will be, you'll have to get to the admin utilities menu to then expand that menu, that folder, and to get to the data import menu. Obviously, you would just click on that, and that takes you into the data import menu. It'll list out all the past data import jobs that you've run previously. And you'll notice some buttons there in the upper left-hand corner of that menu, which will allow you to create new data import jobs. Or you can look at processing details from a prior job if you highlight it and press that button. You can delete any of the prior jobs. If this gets a little unwieldy and you want to get rid of some of the older jobs, you can delete them. And then the final button there is the help button, so you can retrieve help quickly on this data import topic. Also notice that you can see the file name that was imported, the category, the target category that it was imported to, who did it, when it was submitted, when it completed, and the status. I actually ran one today. And you don't see it here, but you'll see it in the demo. And as you can see, notice that this one here took about maybe 2 minutes. But I don't have a lot of data. There's really not a lot of data. But even still, I'm told that with hundreds of thousands of rows that it would literally take minutes to process. So it's totally feasible that an analyst could pump in a fair amount of data via this method. Going further with this, if we want to create a new data import job, we can then click on the new button, and it will then immediately prompt me for a file. So I'll get a browse Windows menu that then I can then go out and find my file. In this case, I'm using a file called budget example, and that's the time series file I just showed you. So if I select that file, then once that file gets selected, it then prompts me to configure the job and the file so that Stratum knows how to accept the data. So here's where I'm going to tell Stratum whether it's going to be an addition of the data or if I'm going to replace the data that's within that target category. The target category needs to be selected here. And these are categories that will only be turned on for data import. So there's a security layer here, obviously, so that you can lock down your actual sales and other data categories that you don't want them to destroy, essentially, because that's what would happen. And so you have some security and setup that would take place, obviously, so that in this case, when you pull that menu down, you only see a select number of categories that you can pump data into. And then you would then tell it, what type of file. In this case, I'm selecting time series, and how many headers. Like I said, we had 3, and you saw this. We had 3 rows of headers, and the 3rd row contained the date. And then you'll need to tell it what format that closely matches the date format in your file. So once you have this done and you keep using the same format and file, this will get easier to do and better for you to understand. Once I'm done with this and I click OK, it then does its best effort to auto map the data into your workbench. In this case, as you can see down below, I can see where it did map. I did a pretty good job of mapping the data into my dimensions. So again, my file had the metadata as such that it matched these dimension names. And as you can see, it doesn't need to be a complete match. It knows that product brand it tries to find the closest relative. And so everything got mapped here. As I said, the dimension, the description columns are being ignored. So it knows to ignore those. If it doesn't get this right and you need to override this, you can pull these these little menus down and select the desired component for you. Here to the right, it actually knows how to map this in. This is a job I've done previously, so it's actually pretty smart. And it remembered that I'm pumping, even though my column says, my file says sales, it's still mapping to opportunity working. So basically I'm pumping in a data from a file into my opportunity amount working measure. And this is January, and this is February, and so on and so forth. I actually ran this this morning, and I'll show you the data, and you'll notice that it matches the file. A few more steps. Once the mapping is done, then you'll need to go through, you could click on, there's a validation button so that you can click on that, but it's going to validate anyway when you try to submit the job. Now, you might get this warning if you have the master file data in your file. It will tell you, that it's not going to import that master file data. So it kind of, again, informs you of that again. Once you click OK, it then says, okay, you're ready to go. Your data mapping is valid. And then you can then go ahead and proceed to process and submit the job. And to do that, you'll just highlight the job and that you just created, and you'll click on the processing button to go ahead and submit the job. The job then, it will then prompt you and warn you that the data import job may take some time, and it'll ask you if you want to continue. In this case, if you click OK, it'll then submit the job, and then you can actually monitor the job here back in the data import menu. And I can see that it's still in process. And that this is just a snapshot, so this is what it might look like when it's processing. When it's finished, like I said, you're going to get an email, and it's going to basically tell you that the job is finished and that you can now go in and see your data that you just imported. Well, I mean, at that point, you're back to viewer and running views and analyzing data. So, running a view, like I said, the data import job runs immediately. Data then becomes available after you get your email. And if it's planning enabled, certainly then you can go in and adjust the data within viewer as needed. So running a view and basically analyzing the differences, or if you're going into a planning enabled view, you now have that data available for you to either analyze or adjust. That's the end of the slide deck. I've got about 10 more minutes of a demo. We can kind of step through some of these menus. If you're interested in this, feel free to contact me, and we can discuss this further, whether it's a good fit for you and your enterprise. And I'm already working with some other clients with this utility, and it's working out pretty good for them. So don't hesitate to contact me, even just for questions or comments or whatever you want to talk about. I'd be glad to demo this further for you as needed. Well, let's take a look at viewer. Notice that now I'm in my viewer demo. Check out the dashboarding capabilities in 7.11. This is our latest and greatest. My, all the fantastic things you can do with that. So don't forget to get your product upgraded. Contact us as needed. It's very simple, and we can help you do that. And you can take advantage of these dashboards immediately with no further licensing. Now, let's look at the data import. The data import does require a planning license. So if you do own planning today, guess what? You can actually use it. So, like I said, admin utilities, data import. Let's go ahead and take a look at this menu. Here are my jobs that I've run in the past. I told you I submitted one today, and sure enough, there it is. What if we were to look at the processing details? So now it's generating a report for me so that I can see what the steps were that it went through for that job. And here it is down here in an Excel spreadsheet. So let's open that up, and this will kind of give you the steps of what it went through to import this job that I ran this morning, and show you There's the file I used. So the job, here's the details of the job he completed, which is good. It was me. It took roughly 2 minutes. It went into my opportunities category. It was an ad. The file type was time series, and so on and so forth. So you get warm and fuzzies when you see a lot of this. As you can see, you get a lot of detail here. But essentially, it's telling me that the job ran accordingly. Here's the file I used or will use to map my data in. I'm going to close that because I'm going to create one on the fly here. I'm going to go ahead and click on new, and it's going to take me to my, like I said, Windows browser. I can go ahead and select the file I'm going to use, and now it's going to prompt me to configure the file. So the first thing I need to tell it to do is whether I'm going to add or replace the data that's already there in my target category, which is the opportunities category. So notice I don't have the opportunity, no pun intended, to put data into any other measure. So I can only put it into the opportunities measure group. So that's locked down. What type of file am I using? Well, if I want to use that file we just looked at, the time series file, let's go ahead and configure it for that. We know that there's 3 headers. We know that the dates on that 3rd row of the header, and then we know that the data looks kind of like that. So I'm done with my configuration. I can click OK. It'll then suck the data into my workbench. I'm going to get rid of my left frame menu. And sure enough, there's the mapping that has occurred. Everything looks actually pretty good. And so on and so forth. So it did remember to map my data to the opportunity amount working. I can change that if I wanted to, maybe put that into my frozen. It's up to you what you want to do here. Here's my data. As you can see for this record here, it's got 300 across the board, and well, 3 times 12, that's 3,600. So that's what I would expect to see for Wilder Foods, for the asparagus product, and for the East region, for the Tip Top brand. Okay, so I'll show you that's exactly what we do see when we get into viewer. If I validate this, there's my validate button. Everything looks hunky-dory, and it says you're ready to go ahead and configure, or I'm sorry, process it. And I can go ahead and click on the process. It'll then warn me and then kick off the job. I'm not going to rerun this. Like I said, I ran it this morning. I got my email that it was finished, and so that was the email I shared with you in the PowerPoint. So you know what that looks like. It's nothing too crazy or fancy. It's just telling you that your job's done. Okay, so all in all, those are the steps that you would go through for, in this case, a time series, type of a file. If you then wanted to look at the data, obviously you can then go into your view, and you can then analyze the data that you just imported into into Stratum. And like I said, remember when I said that should equal 3,600? Well, there's my 3,600. So that's my opportunity dollars for January through December, $3,600. There's the asparagus item. And if I were to change this to a single month, I should see a $300 figure there. And indeed, I do. So this matches my file 100% that I just imported into Stratum this morning. And I'm now, in the same day, I'm able, as a matter of fact, after 2 minutes, I was able to go in and analyze this data. So it's really that simple. Once you have everything set up, and the implementation is really nothing crazy. So we can help you get this implemented quickly, and you can start importing data into Stratum. You can then start analyzing data immediately and really start taking the power of Stratum to the next level.